Hate me if you must, until she returns to my arms. All will be brought to ruin. All this carnage, do you see? I do it for you! I will find my love again. You matter so little. No price is too great, no atrocity beyond my reach. For her, I will do anything.
Hello, lovers and listeners. My name is TV Skyn, and, I'll be honest, when I used to imagine the ruined king in my head, he never looked anything like this. When we think of ancient kings from long ago whose grief and ghosts still haunt these worldly lands, it conjures up images of ring wraiths, essentially. Old, bearded, gaunt, and grasping, half-eaten corpse ghosts nearly crumbling under the weight of their own pathetic grief, or roiling with their pent-up centuries of malice and anger. And yet, here we have Viego, defying a lot of stereotypes and leaning quite hard into a few others. Well, this should be interesting. Let's find out. Viego was never meant to be king. He was a second son, leading a life of indulgence and complacency, when the unexpected death of his older brother makes him heir to a throne that he has no interest in occupying and no skill for managing. No surprise, then, that the advisors and power brokers around him quickly turn against him, although, having no skill for subterfuge, Viego probably didn't even notice. Instead, he noticed Isolde, a poor commoner, a mere seamstress, and he fell deeply, desperately in love. They were married, and from that day on, Viego was well and truly a wife guy. He doted on his wife, he bought presents for his wife, he threw banquets and parties for his wife, and anytime his wife was in the room, she was the only thing that mattered to him. So, of course, when an assassin's dagger comes for Viego, it is Isolde who gets struck and killed by the poison. It turns out, the spoiled little princeling who's so obsessed with his wife does not take kindly to losing his favorite object of affection. Viego becomes obsessed with bringing her back, whatever the cost may be, and when Callista, still alive at this point, tells him about the life-giving waters of the Blessed Isles, he takes an army to conquer the place. He puts Isolde in the magic waters, and she returns as a screaming, horrified banshee, so confused and pained at having been forced back to life that she stabs Viego with his own sword, triggering the ruination. 1,000 years later, Viego stalks the Shadow Isles again. He doesn't remember what happened or how Isolde was taken from him again. All he knows is that she's out there somewhere, and he will stop at nothing to see her again. So, Viego is a military parade in Beijing. Red flags as far as the eye can see. He is a spoiled, self-obsessed, narcissistic, privileged little fail son, so consumed with his own feelings and his own entitlement that he has never developed the capacity to feel care or empathy for anyone or anything else, perhaps except his wife. And I'm curious, if Isolde is ever actually added to the game as a champion, what does the romance with Viego look like from her perspective? When you are a powerless peasant girl and the most powerful man in your entire country comes courting at your door, sending presents, making marriage proposals, getting obsessive, how easy is it, exactly, to say no? How easy is it to get swept off your feet? Which is not to say that she doesn't love him, just that there might be more to it than a fairy tale, uncomplicated love story. Now, we'll get into this more when we tackle his character design, but Viego is an interesting take on the idea of a king of the undead. Ghosts and specters are often depicted as obsessive, haunting the places where they once lived, or eternally pursuing failed quests or seeking ancient vengeance. Viego, on the other hand, is a revenant that walks the earth obsessed with fixing a broken heart, to undo the grief that was dealt to him, and Like Oedipus Rex before him, he's doomed to ensure his own failure, because we know what Isolde thinks of him now. In Senna's story, Redeemed, the fragment of Isolde's soul that was trapped with her in Thresh's lantern speaks to Senna. "What does he want?" "To possess what is no longer his," she said, the softness gone from her voice, the hallowed light flaring with her words. "He is a child with a bitter heart, who would rather make the world share his misery than face it alone." Viego will burn the world to see Isolde again, and Isolde is not impressed. If or when he manages to bring her back, she will not thank him for what he has done to make it happen. An important takeaway here is that Viego thinks that he's the hero of the story. Of course he does. He's a spoiled little failed son who was raised to think that everything is about him all the time. He thinks of himself like Orpheus descending into the underworld to rescue Eurydice, the lone romantic hero risking everything for love, that most important thing of all. And everyone and everything else to him are supporting actors, things that exist as set dressing on his story. Viego isn't really cool, and he certainly isn't a badass. He's a spoiled child, lashing out because someone took his toys away. He is, in other words, a wiener. Which raises the relevant question. As a quick digression, we've just discussed in detail why Viego is kind of a shitty little brat and a pretty toxic person overall, but in doing so, there's a risk that we miss out on an important part of his character, which is that he is in fact extremely hot.
I know his dick is big! I know it's big! Please, destroy me!
Now, he's not really my type, I must admit, but a core part of his appeal and his concept is that he's supposed to be tremendously attractive. When he believes himself to be a tragic romantic hero, he's supposed to have some basis for that claim, like you're supposed to be able to see that. And we'll talk about that in more detail when we talk about his character design, but before that, I think it's worth taking a moment to explore what makes him seductive and appealing, besides his looks. Viego is a monster, yes, but he's a monster who loves you so much that he will walk through fire and blood. He will level mountains and conquer countries, all of it for you. When he sees you, he sees an angel. Where your feet touch the ground, he will hold that earth sacred. He worships every breath from your lips. In his eyes, you are perfection, and no one and nothing will ever hurt you while he's there to shield you from it. He will do anything for you. Perhaps he will even change for you. Perhaps you can be the one who is so special, the one whose love and affection is deep enough that even this monster will be tamed at your touch. Now, is that necessarily a healthy romantic fantasy? No, absolutely not. And if you ever find yourself in a relationship dynamic like that in real life, it is my fervent recommendation that you escape as soon as possible. But as a fantasy, ooh. Like, there's a reason that this is popular. This is Kylo Ren and Anakin Skywalker. It's Edward Cullen and Jared the Goblin King and the Phantom of the Opera. It's Louis and Lestat. It is Beauty and the Beast. It is an old and very powerful romantic fantasy, and it is, stereotypically anyway, a female romantic fantasy. Certainly not exclusively. Plenty of dudes are into this kind of thing too, but historically that's how it's pitched. And while I'm not a woman and it's not really pitched at me, I think Viego kind of nails it. He is a walking complex of red flags. He's a terrible idea on two legs, but he's also a promise that it would feel so good to make that mistake. You know it's wrong. You know it's gonna end badly, but my God, have you seen the cut of those abs and the curve of those lips? What would he whisper only to you? What does it sound like when he gasps? Isn't it boring to live a life without making at least a few exciting mistakes. So Viego is an emo boy, and I say that not necessarily as a criticism, more as an observation, because Viego is explicitly very modern in his style. I'm sure within the lore of Runeterra, what he's wearing was once upon a time a king's uniform or whatever, but when viewed with modern eyes, my dude is walking around in skinny jeans, wearing double belts as accessories and a crop top leather jacket with no shirt under it. He's got eyeshadow and guy liner, his hair is romantically disheveled, and my dude has not a speck of body hair on his immaculately sculpted abs. If this kid lived in the real world, his social media would be wall-to-wall with Thirst Trap's My Chemical Romance lyrics and black and white photos of himself looking somber and philosophical while it rains outside. And in this, he's strangely similar to Seraphine, of all characters. You may remember that in What's the Deal with Seraphine, one of the things we discussed was that in focusing on making Seraphine look like a pop star, Riot imported a lot of aesthetic cues from the real world that really didn't fit into the aesthetics of Piltover and so on. This was very much an intentional trade-off. Riot wanted her to appeal as a pop star, and they sacrificed the world building of her character design to do it. Viego is doing a similar thing. Riot really wants this kid to be a sexy emo boy, and in order to make that happen, they've given him a very modern and real-world feeling aesthetic, which comes at the cost of the world building around him. Like, unless everyone in the ancient kingdom of Camavor shopped at Hot Topic and Forever 21, Viego doesn't really look like he comes from Runeterra, and he certainly doesn't look like a 1,000-year-old dead boy king of a lost empire. And Riot could tell me as much as they want that,
oh, in the lore, actually, Viego is wearing a very fantasy-looking royal uniform. It's just that the ruination randomly happened to make it look indistinguishable from modern fashion.
but that doesn't really change the fact that Viego looks modern, and this modernity is clearly intentional. And I've seen people be put off by that for pretty much the same reason that people were put off by Seraphine looking so modern. For a lot of people, that kind of incongruity is distracting and a little disappointing because it's clearly prioritizing making the character appealing and sexy over maintaining the aesthetics and universe of the game itself. And this is a bit of a rising thing for League of Legends. We saw something similar with Aphelios, who draws heavily from K-pop aesthetics, and Set, who brought straight-up Yakuza vibes into his design, and even Kiana, who in my opinion also feels more like a real-world modern character than a fantasy character in her aesthetic. I will say though, I don't mind it so much on Viego. In this particular case, I think it works well with his character and his story. Like, he thinks of himself as the only main character in the world, and I think that wearing a ridiculously out-of-place outfit to make himself special works as a storytelling element of his design. Kind of for the same reason that Set's Yakuza fashion kind of works. It does tell the story of the character. They would dress kind of ostentatious and weird. Still, it's a legitimate criticism of his design, and it's a legitimate criticism of Riot's design direction recently, that they have been prioritizing appeal and attractiveness far too much in their designs. And the end point of designing for appeal ultimately will be gacha game aesthetics, which is fine for gacha games, but in my opinion, it would suck in League of Legends. So, Riot, please don't. Anyway, a couple of nice details I like. First of all, the big hole in his chest, because it has a clever little double meaning. It tells us that he's heartbroken, trying to fill a void where his love used to be, but it also tells us that he's heartless, devoid of compassion and kindness. It tells the story of both sides of his character, and that is very efficient design. So too is the crown he wears, or doesn't wear, actually. Viego's crown is not a physical object, it is a floating ornament made from spooky ghostlight. Because, again, Viego is not a real king. Even when he was alive, he could not be persuaded to give a damn about his nation or his people. But he is a king in his own mind. His entitlement is not based on any accomplishment he has in real life. He did nothing to earn it, and so this crown is not real. Merely a projection of his ego, a projection which he is only too happy to force on others. So, where Viego's personality and certainly his character design is all a little bit extra, his animation is actually fairly understated. And a good place to start with any character is their idle animation, because the idle animation is sort of the baseline for the character's personality. Like, how do they relate to the world? How do they feel about things? How are you supposed to read this character as a personality? That's usually something that you'll find a good barometer for in the idle animation. So take a look at Viego's posture. Take a look at how he relates to the world around him. And what kind of personality do we see here? Like, if you were to meet a person who was approaching you like this, like hunched over with the shoulders sloped forward, like their head tilted down, and like disregard the expression, but looking up at you from this head that's tilted down, that's not like, this person does not want to say hello, this person is giving you a death glare. Like, there's really no way around it except that this body posture is, in some way, hostile. Not necessarily aggressive, but it's not like this person does not want to say hi. This person is not interested in having a chat or a conversation. This person has something on their mind. They're brooding over something, and you can really see that, especially in like his hunched over attitude and the tension that is in this arm that he's holding out in front of himself a little bit. Like, he does not look relaxed as such. He looks like he has something on his mind, which of course Viego is an obsessive. We know this. This introversion, this turning inwards towards himself, comes across really well in his secondary idle animation. This one will play if you leave him standing without moving him for a bit. And what he does is this. That tells you kind of everything you need to know about this kid. And the extra detail that I like about it is that you're supposed to see him from the top, right? So when he does this movement, what he's actually doing is that he's looking at you, the player, and then he's sort of bringing his hand up to his hollow chest, and he's sort of grasping where his heart used to be, and his fingers curl inwards, almost like claws, like he's trying to rake at his heart. And then he kind of goes, but my heart is empty. And then he kind of lets the hand fall as though he's been sort of defeated by the weight of the world. And this is paired with like this expression thing where it's like he opens his mouth and he's like, closes his eyes, and you can see the emotion playing across his face, and this sort of shaking head animation as though he's kind of giving up in the face of everything. It's very, very, it's not, again, not an extravagant gesture, it's not a cartoony or anything, but it's a very dramatic gesture. It's a very dramatic behavior, and it tells you a lot about this person, that he's so in his head and in his feelings and so obsessed with this bit. It's like, my heart is empty and yet it aches, like that kind of thing. And you just get that from his secondary idle animation. It's really well executed. But, like I said, mostly his animation is fairly understated, and one of the good ways to see that is to take a look at his attack animation. Because usually when we have attack animation in League of Legends, if you check out the set episode especially, the characters will distort quite extremely when they are doing the hits with their weapons. Because, like, when a character hits in League of Legends, often you'll see the weapon or the fist or whatever they're hitting with inflate, sort of get bigger on screen. You get this pop, like this really sort of powerful smack that you get out of it, where there'll be distortions like squash and stretch, where the character will stretch out their proportions unnaturally to really accentuate their movement, to really accentuate the hit. Viego, not so much. Like, you can see that there is some. You can see that, like, especially if you take a look at his leg over here, you can see that the leg does do a little bit of a squashy, stretchy. As he leans in, like he's getting ready to put his weight into the hit of the blade. But it's overall, like, it's not much. It's a very straight animation. It's just kind of letting the sword itself, and like part of the reason why there's no need to inflate Viego and no need to like to make him his animations bigger than they need to be is because he has this giant sword. Like, he has this enormous sword that when it gets swung anywhere on the field, it is visible, it's readable, people can see, like, even from up here, you can see when this thing gets swung around. It's a fairly obvious big animation just by virtue of its sheer size. But the attack animation itself is fairly understated. There's not a lot of squash and stretch. There's not a lot of extreme disproportionality. There's not a lot of extreme distortion or breaking of the model. There kind of doesn't need to be. Even in his critical animations, which are traditionally, those are like the really big ones, right? Like, the critical hit is the one where the character goes all out and really lands a huge punch and a huge swat of damage. not much happens. Like, again, you can see the little squash and stretches happening in the model as, like, he's winding up to do his sweep here on his critical hit. But the main big thing that they do is they add the trail to the sword. They add this, like, this trailing edge that follows the sword into the swing, and that's the thing that kind of gives it this big pop. And one of my favorites for displaying Viego's personality, actually, is his walk, which I'm going to slow down a little bit again, just so we can get a better look at it. Because, again, you see someone walking like this, and what's on their mind? Like, how do you read their mood? How do you read their intent and their purpose? Because he has this whole thing, like, you can see he has terrible posture. His shoulders are sloped forward, his head is sort of low and, like, pushed forward, and that's a predatorial walk. Like, this is a walk of someone, like, who's like moving towards something that they want, and they don't care who they have to hurt in order to get it. It's a very, again, it's not overtly aggressive, but it's the kind of walk that promises that aggression is absolutely an option if anything gets in his way. It's what I would call sort of an MK walk, which, I don't know how many kids these days familiar with the MK walk. So, okay, so back in the day, right, in Mortal Kombat, the very first game, the AI was a cheating bastard. It would read your inputs, it would respond perfectly, it could be functionally impossible to beat it, and that's part of how they extracted quarters from you. But one of the things the AI would do is that it would just walk towards you. Not very fast or anything, it would just walk towards you, and then literally anything you do, it would simply just kind of swat away your attack, do a perfect counterattack, kick the shit out of you. That became known as MK walking. Because it was kind of like, oh, this unstoppable thing is coming towards you and you're just fucked. Like, there's nothing you can do, this thing is gonna crush you, because the computer has decided not to let you win right now. So sometimes I see animation that I call MK walking, because it's kind of animation that has that same promise, which is like, if you get in this thing's way, if it gets close to you, you're gonna be destroyed. Like, this thing has murder on its mind, and doesn't really care about you necessarily, it's just that you're between it and the thing that it wants. And that's very much Viego's whole vibe, his whole mood, is that he's moving inexorably towards this goal that he has, which is Isolde, and he's not interested in you. Like, if you're in his way, he doesn't care. You're not a person to him, you're just a thing that's temporarily inconvenient to him. He's going to sweep you away, and then he's going to get what he wants. That's his personality. That's what he's like. And for my money, that comes across really well in his character animation. And one of the little details I like is, look at his hand. You see the way that the fingers are, like, curled up like claws? This tension. There's tension there. Like, this is not a relaxed hand posture. This is something that you do when you have something on your mind. Like, that when you are ready for violence, when you're angry, you are bitter, you're upset. Like, not a fist, but the promise of a fist. That being said, there are some moments when Viego does get to be a little extra. This is his idle in animation. This is a transitional animation when he goes from, usually from running or from moving, into an idle pose. So this is when he goes from being active, from moving around, from doing attacks, from running, from doing whatever, into having to stop, calm down, and stand still. And look how this plays out. Let's just turn that up to full speed. There's a little tantrum. You see that? Here, Viego is showing us a little bit of that pent-up rage and anger that he has got inside him. Because you can see that it's like he's stopping, and then it's like, "Argh!" And then, "Raw!" He does this shout, like, God damn it. You get the sense that, like, he's stopping, and there's a part of him that's just like, I want to keep going, or he's got some kind of distress inside him. Maybe, like, we know that he's lost most of his memories, for example, which might be kind of a painful thing for him. Something or other is definitely going on. Like, he's got some kind of roiling emotion or distress happening inside him that he's expressing by doing this move as he comes to a rest, as he kind of has to steady himself and calm down. He does this, God, fine, I'll stop for a second. Like, this frustration that's boiling over inside him comes out in this little interstitial animation that leads into his idle pose. Another animation where Viego gets to be a bit extra is his laugh, which again, let's speed that up to full speed. Because here we see a little bit of an echo of his behavior in the Idol 2 animation, like the Idol variation where he looks up to the sky and clutches his heart and is like, oh, the pain. This is his laugh animation. And here, you can see he does kind of the same thing. Like, at the end of it, as he's finished laughing, he just kind of lets his hand drop. And then he shakes his head again and is like, no, there is no joy in a world without her. As though he's kind of like, no, I can't, like, laughing is not permitted. It's like laughing is pointless and stupid, and I'm not gonna feel even the slightest hint of mirth and joy because my wife is not with me. Like, that's sort of kind of the mood, and again, his terrible, terrible, terrible posture, which has possibly never been worse than in this animation. You'll see that when he drops the sword down and the way that his entire chest kind of just collapses in on itself. So, like, he has this laugh animation, but he doesn't really look happy, does he? Like, there's no part of him, unlike someone like, for example, Samira, who has one of the most extra laugh animations in the whole game, where, like, you can see her whole body is just, like, engaged in absolute mirth and joy, like she's laughing from her belly throughout her entire body. Viego is much more like, this is less a laugh out of joy or because he's found anything funny, and more of like a dejected laugh of like, oh, all is pointless, life is suffering. I can only laugh, like the Joker. It's more that kind of a vibe. This is his ult. He rises into the air, and then he gets ready to do a hit or do some kind of a landing, depending on how the animation itself plays out. Now, the hit is still relatively unremarkable. Like, there's a little bit of, you can see a little bit of stretching on the arm, and a little bit of like, and some trailing on the sword. Nice animation. It's his ultimate animation, though. You would expect maybe that they'd go a little bit extra with it. Well, they do in this one. Now, it's hard to see when it's in motion, even at low speed, but if we were to pause it and drag it back to here, say hello to Long Viego. This is the only animation I have found on the man that really does the League of Legends distortion to overplay his animation. And I think part of the reason is because what he's doing here is he's stabbing his sword into the ground. So we don't get that big swinging arc that we get on a lot of his attack animations to really sort of sell the power of the hit. And so for this one, it seems like the animator made the decision, no, we're going to have to do something extra. Like, we're going to have to go a little bit more out there to make this... Because this is just like the landing stab at the end of his ultimate. So, seems like they wanted to go a little bit more out there to make this stab into the ground feel powerful, feel like it had a lot more to give. Because as you can see, on the ordinary hit on the ultimate, they just kind of let the sword and the trail behind it carry that power. So, yeah, I wish we'd had more fun, big sort of animations to enjoy, but we're just gonna have to make do with very long Viego. I like Viego. I think he's an interesting concept, executed well. League of Legends is getting more and more handsome, sexy boys, and eventually it's definitely gonna be too many, Riot. Don't repeat your mistakes, please. But a sexy, seductive, toxic, obsessive boyfriend with delusions of romantic heroism is a good character, and in this case, I can accept sacrificing some world building in his character design to give him a modern aesthetic that supports that. All of that being said, there better be a moment in the Ruined King game where Illaoi and Senna just team up to kick the shit out of him. Hey, thank you very much for watching. I'm finally caught up on What's the Deal videos, enough that I can start working on the one for Gwen once her full lore is released. God, I need to start being faster about these. Anyway, a bit of housekeeping. I'm going to start working on Bloodborne videos again now. I took a bit of a break to avoid burnout, but it's about time to get back to the hunt, so look forward to that. Also, I have a shorts channel now. I upload a quick little character design analysis on there every day. Subscribe if you want to see that. Or follow me on TikTok. I post them there as well. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, you know the drill. If you want to hit the bell icon, that helps me out because of algorithm reasons, I think. As usual, I have my Patreon. I have a merchandise store with some things in it that you can buy if you want to, and I have a coffee for a tip jar. If you want to use any of those, I am grateful. It helps me pay the rent, but if you don't want to or you can't, please don't worry about it. I'm just happy that you watched the video this far. Speaking of which, actually, I've seen other YouTubers do this and I want to try it at least once. If you got this far in the video, put a skull emoji in your comment if you post one. I'll be on the lookout for them. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching. Remember to wear a mask and wash your hands, take the vaccine when it comes, and try to act in solidarity with those who are working to make the world a better place.